Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to take a first look at the new Laowa. This is the 15mm f2 lens. They call it a 0D. It's from the company, Chinese manufacturer Venus Optics. And I've taken a look at several other of their lenses before, including the 12mm f2.8 0D lens, which shares some commonality with this, although I'll highlight a few of those differences in just a moment. But certainly this is the first of their lenses that I have reviewed for the Sony E-mount system. And so specifically, I'm reviewing this on a Sony a7R III. And so this is a full frame lens, 15mm, that's about 110 degrees of coverage. And so a very nice wide angle lens and an intriguing option. Now, as I said, compared to the 12mm f2.8, obviously 12mm is a more complex focal length to cover, and that's borne out in the fact that this is a little bit simpler optically compared to the 12mm. The 12mm was 16 elements in 10 groups. This is 12 elements in 9 groups, so a less extreme focal length. But you get a couple of trade-offs for that. Number one, we've got a wider maximum aperture, f2, which makes this an interesting lens, for capturing light, obviously shooting in low light conditions. It's also going to be an interesting option for shooting the night sky, for astrophotography. So I'm looking forward to taking a look at that and hopefully getting some decent nights to test Coma during the time. But of course, the other advantage is that the 12mm has a curved front element and no, screw-in filter threads there. And so you're forced to resort to kind of either aftermarket, although Laowa does sell a filter system for it, but it means you have to use square filters and an aftermarket filter holder. Whereas here you have a pretty common 72mm filter thread, and so you can use traditional filters. So certainly a few advantages there. The lens is also a little bit smaller and lighter. Thus, as you can see, it's a pretty nice match size-wise and weight-wise to the Sony a7R III body that I'm doing the review on. So we're going to jump in right now and we're going to take a closer look at the build, the design, some of the actual handling attributes of the lens. So let's take a look. And let's take a look starting at the front of the lens here. And so as you can see, one distinct advantage compared to the 12mm is that we have a standard filter thread here. Metal filter, as is the rest of the lens, in metal and glass. It is a pretty standard 72mm filter size, and so that's certainly nice. This lens also claims to be a zero distortion lens that we'll test, and certainly the 12mm was pretty close to living up to that claim. Now, there is an included lens hood here that, like the rest of the body, is made of metal. I like the fact, of course, that this is nicely incorporated into the design itself, and so the lens profile looks good. And I like the way that this blue accent ring here kind of flows into that and differentiates that transition. Now, the lens hood itself, I don't know how much that it's going to accomplish. In some ways, it's fairly shallow, but at the same time, so far my results have been quite good in terms of flare resistance, and so maybe it doesn't need a huge lens hood. In terms of the rest of the physical design here, this is a really nice all metal. Everything is really nice feeling. The actual focus ring here is nicely damped, and it moves like a quality manual focus lens should. And so in terms of the focus throw here, we have a little less than 180 degrees. I'm going to guess it to be somewhere around 150, 160 degrees of focus throw, but should be enough to be reasonably accurate. However, one thing I do want to point out is that a lot of this focus range is about the close focus nature of the lens. And it can focus down really close to right under 6 inches. And so remember, that is actually measured from on the Sony. That's measured from this mark right here. And so if you're talking about 5.91 inches, it means that you're basically being able to focus down just within an inch or a few centimeters from the front of the lens barrel. And my experience is you can pretty much guarantee you're going to have some shading at that point. So just something to bear in mind. But interestingly, the lens actually has a zero 0.25 times magnification at that focal length, or that focus distance, I should say. And so, you know, that's certainly a useful thing, and it'll allow you to do some creative things with it. That's a 1 to 4 times magnification ratio, which really that tops a lot of lenses. But going back to the focus here, you can see that a lot of our focus throw actually comes before you even get to the 1 meter mark there. And so you've got all of that to get to 1 meter, and then just that little bit between 1 meter and infinity. So obviously a lot of your focus is going to be happening there, and so anyway, that's just something to bear in mind. You do see that we have hyperfocal distance markings at f5.6, f11, f22, and that certainly helps. Fortunately, in an E-mount, as we've got here, Sony bodies like the a7R III that we're using here are you know, pretty forgiving when it comes to using manual focus lenses because of an optical viewfinder where you have the ability to magnify the image or put overlays, etc. Now, other thing to note here is we have an aperture ring built into this. This is a manual focus, also a manual aperture, and so all the way from f2 through f22. And these seem to be just full stops, no half stops or partial clicks. However, the lens does have another trick up its sleeve, and that is that here you have the ability to declick the aperture. And so as a result, I'm going to pull the lens off and so you can see what I'm talking about here. But as a result, you have the ability to just kind of zoom through the aperture itself without any kind of clicks. And so while you don't have partial clicks in between in terms of stops, you have the ability, if you switch it into a clickless mode, to where you can choose, you know, any kind of aperture value basically that you want along there. So of course, there are those that shoot video that really like this option so that you can do aperture racking or something similar. So if you want to go back into the clicked or, you know, stop mode, you just click this switch back over this way, and now you're back to different stops as you move along there. Now, looking towards the rear of the lens, a couple of things to point out. Obviously, continuing the metal theme here, all metal here. I do want to note inside here that this is a real plus to me, that this is all really nicely engineered back here. And so while the lens does not have a weather sealing or doesn't claim weather sealing, the fact that even when it's, you know, this is at your closest focus distance, you'll see that it stays pretty sealed inside here. As there's a little bit of play, the lens does move some as you focus in and out, but at no point does it really open up and expose the interior of the lens. And so that's a nice plus. But as I did note on the negative, there is no weather sealing. I hate to see that on a wide angle lens because I think that wide angle lenses always benefit from having weather sealing because of the nature of the way that you're going to use them. Now let's just take a look at how it fits here on the a7R III body, and this is a nice balance. It's a 500 gram lens, and so while it's all metal, it's still quite light, and so that's 1.1 pounds, and so that certainly undercuts the weight of the 12mm by example, which is about 610 grams, and so it weighs in at, you know, roughly a quarter of a pound more, for example. The lens itself is, it's not particularly wide either. As you can see, you've got lots of room for your grip there. It is 2.6 inches in diameter, its widest point, and it is 3.23 inches long. And so, you know, nice and compact. That's 66 millimeters around by 82 millimeters in length. And so certainly interesting there. And so a lot of pluses to look to on that. Field of view is about 110 degrees, which makes that obviously very useful for a lot of landscape shooting. And frankly, to me, 15 millimeters is a more practical focal length for many shooters than what 12 millimeters is. 12 millimeters is really hard to compose with. Now, just to give you a size comparison, here is the Laowa compared to the Tamron 15 to 30 millimeter f2.8. So obviously the Tamron is a zoom lens, but it does have a smaller maximum aperture. And as you can see, this, of course, is a much nicer pairing for the a7R III body in terms of weight than what the Tamron lens is. Now, in terms of price, this lens is $849. Obviously, in terms of the build quality, this is very much like a Zeiss lens, and so the build quality lives up to the price. Some people might be deterred by the fact that for that price, you're not getting autofocus, neither you're getting any kind of electronic coupling to the camera body itself. So there certainly are some limitations that come with that. All in all, however, there's nothing to complain about outside of basically what you would like to see there that's not in terms of the build quality. The build quality is really quite exceptional. It's a lovely lens. So as you can see, we've got a beautifully built lens here. There's certainly nothing wrong with what is here. If there's anything that I could criticize, it's what's not here. And manual focus, really with a wide-angle lens, and particularly on a Sony E-mount body, I'm not so put off by manual focus only. Not really a huge deal. But what I am missing on this lens is the lack of any kind of electronic communication. I get that in a Canon or, a Canon body, for example, because Canon's not going to allow a third-party profile anyway. But here it seems like a missed opportunity in that Sony is much more friendly in working with third parties and embedding profiles in both JPEG and RAW files, which in this case could have made certainly a real difference. It also, of course, would allow, that XF information to be communicated, and so you'd be able to see what aperture you had selected and things like that. And so I do wish that there had been some electronic communication for that reason. Of course, I always like to also see weather sealing on wide-angle lenses, and so neither of those things is here, and so really to me that's where the demerits come. But in terms of the actual build and the handling, the lens handles really nicely. Both the aperture ring and the focus ring move very, very nicely. And of course, the ability to declick that aperture if you're wanting to do some aperture racking for video, that's also obviously an attractive feature. And so all in all, a nice, nicely built lens here, and certainly a nice option for those of you that are looking for a wide aperture and wide angle lens for Sony FE. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, I've already got an image gallery going with a variety of shots I've been taking with the lens, and follow back. If you look back on a regular basis, I'll be adding images on a daily basis as I shoot more with the lens. And I'll certainly be following up with a closer breakdown of the image quality and giving you a final verdict on the lens as well. I'll hopefully even throw it in onto a gimbal system and do a little bit of video work with it, as I suspect this could be an attractive option for that application as well. So stay tuned, and I'll be back with more coverage. If you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.